is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, Sandra here from Parallel Edge. Welcome to our webinar about cybersecurity and cyber insurance, which is a very important thing to have. We have Justin joining us from Techrug. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box or raise your hand and I can unmute you to ask the questions. And with that, I'm handing it over to Kevin and Justin.
That's great. Thank you, Sandra. So I just wanted to quickly go over, just some of the cybersecurity seminar that we've done in the past. Just basically setting up the reason that we need the cyber insurance. We've been talking with Justin this morning and even prior to today. It's a very eye-opening subject, and it's definitely enlightening. It's a huge subject, even wider than I originally thought. So I really appreciate him being here today. I also apologize for missing last week. I was definitely under the weather, could not perform anything. So I appreciate everybody waiting a week and joining us again today. So just to start things off, we had named this, Do I Need Cyber Insurance for My Microwave? The microwave has been in the news as far as being a topic of discussion about how to hack in and listen using microwaves. But, in all seriousness, cybersecurity and cyber attacks and whatnot, they're coming from all over the place. Been in the news very recently, all kinds of stuff. So, I'd gone over this slide in the past, which is basically, that cybersecurity, it used to start out that criminals or crimes started out with one-on-one or one on a couple people. In the old West where you would have one person coming onto a train or in a back alley and you say stick them up, and it's a one-on-one crime. But today you have vast amounts of people or accounts or credit cards or whatever. I mean, it's every week it's becoming where a small group of individuals or even just a single individual are hacking large institutions. You can remember back to when Target was identified as having 70 million accounts hacked, eBay 145 million accounts hacked, Adobe even 36 million accounts hacked. So it's definitely happening on a regular basis, whether it's excuse me, whether it's your account itself, whether it's your credit card information, it could be your emails that they're reading. And they're coming in all different types of ways. And, just in March alone, the numbers are a little skewed. Sometimes they say it's 34 million. Sometimes it's even more than 50 million. But in general, it's about 50 million accounts hacked from Yahoo. And that's after the fact that in 2016, they were also hacked. So, you think that did this company even learn their lesson? I'm sure that they saw what was happening. They put things in place. But they found another way in, and it's becoming more and more prominent. So, the more things that we can kind of put in place, the better. So, that stems from, either your Trend Micro or any kind of antivirus solution that you might have in place. That also goes to, just your own best practices to make sure what you should and shouldn't click on. It also goes to your router, and in fact, this is a plug for our next webinar. We're trying to talk about taking the veil, if you will, off of what routers actually do and how they keep you safe from the outside world. So stay tuned for our next webinar on that one. But Symantec said even in 2015, and I can't wait till the 2016 statistics come out, but in 2015 alone, nearly 1 million new malware threats were being released daily, per day. So that's a heck of a lot. And that's just the malware. That's not even the active hacking that's going on, with something like Yahoo or, Target and stuff like that. These are just, people phishing. They buy, this program from a group of individuals. They attach their own signatures on this. And then they send it out to 1 million people or, a couple million people with, emails, or maybe they stick it on a website. And basically they're just phishing and waiting for something to come on the end of the line to where it's actually infected a machine. And then they can be paid for, that's their payday essentially, for, when they're paid that ransom. So that's what they're looking for really. And I put this up before during our cybersecurity seminar. it's definitely telling where, Robert Mueller, and this is back in 2012, so I'd love to hear what he says today. But there's only two types of companies that are out there, those who've been hacked and those that will be. So, he's really saying, and this is all the way back in 2012, it's not a matter of if, it's when that you're going to be hacked. And, are they going to be successful? There are certain points during the day that, we'll be notified of something, going on. The attack has been thwarted, but, there's definitely attempts going on. So it really depends on the policies and procedures and the items that you have in place to keep the bad guys out and the good guys safe. So, it's a very, very telling quote. And it definitely comes to pass where you try to find out what's that number one security threat to your business that antivirus, firewalls, anything, security protocols can't protect you against. And the unfortunate aspect of that is it's you. And I'm not saying that it's you individually that you're going to go and infect your computer on purpose, but maybe it's a misjudgment here or a bad click there. Depending on what happens, it's unfortunate, but you're the biggest hole in the organization, and it's these types of seminars, webinars. I love coming out and talking with individuals, answering your questions. I'm set to go to a couple of different clients coming up. I've already been to a couple of your places of business. But if there's any time in the future you want me to come out and individualize this presentation for you, definitely let me know so that we can custom tailor this to maybe some things that are going on in your organization. But when it comes down to it, it's a stray email that happens to be a piece of spam, and or a website where you happen to click on the wrong thing, and then all of a sudden your computer's infected and possibly even the server itself. And I know it's a scary thing. Sometimes it's an embarrassing thing. And some people even try to cover those things up themselves, like, oh, I got infected on my local computer, and they try to cover it up or try to get the infection off of there. And unfortunately, sometimes it makes it a little worse. So, in general, definitely let us know if anything happens like that. But there's many different types of viruses that are out there. And I'm talking about some of the bigger ones here, which is like CryptoLocker. We've had, Sandra, how many crypto attacks since the beginning of the year? It's been a hot topic this year.
It's been at least 3 or 4, I believe.
Yeah, and we're only at the end of March, beginning of April at this point. And crypto is one of those scary ones because they'll either encrypt your local computer, or sometimes we found they even hack into the server and encrypt what's on there. But basically, what crypto does, it sends like a command key or a lock-in key, if you think about it. They send that key off-site, and then they send a key back on-site, which locks up your files. And there's been many iterations since the beginning of different types of crypto locker that's out there. And, it's funny how you have to think about it, where I remember bringing this up during seminars that, this is a full-time job for some people. This is how they make their living, and it's a scary subject, but people are trying to not only infect you, but they're also trying to come up with the next biggest thing. What's the next version? What's the next biggest thing that's out there? Because crypto first came on board or came online, end of 2012, beginning of 2013. If you think about it, it's definitely gone through a number of iterations since then. So we're up to CryptoLocker 4. There's also different names that they're the same thing, but basically it's a crypto virus where, the first one that was out there basically just encrypted all your files, and you needed to get the encryption back. But there was different ways around that. Since then, they've made it even worse, where crypto version 2 wasn't even detected by antivirus or your firewall. Crypto 3, it had privileged escalation, so even if you yourself were locked out of certain files on the server, so let's say, an administrator, or maybe certain files were locked down to just accounting, they would be able to escalate their privileges to encrypt those files, even though you yourself didn't have access to them. And it also got rid of shadow copies, which was usually our first line of defense to get those files back. And then the latest version, it encrypts the file names. So not only do you have the files that are encrypted, you don't even know what the files were named anymore. So, I don't know what's going to come up with Crypto 5. That's one of those things that kind of keeps people up at night, what the next iteration is going to be. It's a scary subject. And there's lots of different types of viruses that are out there, not only the crypto type viruses, but you have something like 0-day vulnerabilities where on the very first day, you go to patch something, and on that very first day that it comes out, there's already a hole in whatever you've put out. So it's interesting that how quickly those things come out. And in 2015 alone, Symantec said there was at least one of those released each week. And that's a pretty scary thing as well. So you might update Adobe Flash on your system or Java, and right on the very first day, they're already finding a vulnerability in that patch. And then you have to say, do I patch on the first day? Do I wait? And that's one of those questions that even Justin's going to be talking about in a little bit. Botnets, another scary one that's out there where basically these viruses get onto your computer and make them a slave. According to Kaspersky, botnets, not spam viruses or worms, currently pose the biggest threat to the internet. So it's one of those things where you happen to go onto a place, you infect your machine, but it doesn't really look like it's infected. It's nothing that's going to come up on the screen and flash and say, hey, you're infected. It's one of those things that kind of lays dormant. There was a hacker group known as Lizard Squad that took down the gaming functionality of Sony and Microsoft using this type of attack, using botnets to basically take down and use a denial of service attack against those companies. And these are huge, huge companies. And they basically just wanted to do this just to prove a point. So it's one of those scary things that are out there. And, there's lots of different ones. Back in the early 2000s, you have worms. Those are those types of viruses. I remember there was like a Kiss Me type worm. You get an email and all of a sudden it copies that email to all the people in your contact group, and it goes on and goes, and it's basically self-replicating. Trojans, those come in looking like it's one program, but it's actually a virus of some sort. You have different browser hijackers that are out there. So when you go to a website, it's actually somebody else's website, but because your browser is taken over, you don't know the difference between the two. You have identity theft and stealing of bank funds, and this one has come up even since the beginning of 2017. Hackers have gone into these smart thermostats, these Nest thermostats, and they've infected those Nest thermostats with code, and they become offensive devices at that point. So what they'll do is they'll infect these devices, these Nest thermostats or different thermostats that are out there, and they'll start infecting or trying to hack any Droid phones within distance of itself. So it's interesting, how quickly these types of vulnerabilities are taken over. You might have something that's looking out on the internet. I think somebody said, around Christmas time they found like a smart crock pot on Amazon, so that you could be, remote and then turn your crock pot on with an app on your phone. But the more you look into the black hole that's the internet, the more it's going to look back at you. So, however long it's going to take somebody to hack your crock pot, that'll be an interesting phone call, don't you think, Sandra, that my crock pot has been taken over by a virus. Can you send a parallel edge technician to come out, and clean up my crock pot? That'll be interesting.
That's good.
But I wanted to, talk a little bit about, what's your time worth? This is something I haven't gone over in the past, but, basically, how long does it take us to come out and clean a crock pot, or come out and clean a computer, or come out and clean a server, and how do we then justify, the negating of that attempt? So if you have, let's say you have you're just using your Comcast router as your firewall. Now you can kind of justify, based on the amount of downtime that you've had, to expense or to show why you should expense something maybe like a $2,000 Sonic wall, because you find that with the amount of downtime that you have to understand what that monetary value of being down is worth. So you have lots of things to consider, such as your reputational damage, your loss of clients, possibly, if you're into, personally identifiable information, you have class action lawsuits and individual lawsuits. You might have legal fees, compliance lawsuits. You know, the fact that you're down and you need to replace that data. You know, if you're completely down, if that server has either been hacked or, you know, the server is down to the point where all those files are corrupted and there's no on-site backup and you're waiting for a backup to come from Saskatchewan, you know, you're waiting, basically, you're just waiting for that data, and you have people that are just staring at screens with nothing to work on. So how much does that cost, that downtime and that loss of productivity? You know, I kind of put together this quick little spreadsheet. You know, basically, if you have a billable rate for your, you know, your individuals that you have, if their billable rate is about 80 bucks and you have 20 people on staff, you can do the math really quickly. If you're down for a half day, it's about $6,400 you're going to lose just for a half day of people just sitting there waiting for stuff to happen. If you have a really, really bad crypto locker attack and maybe you're down for 2 full days, at that billable rate with that many people, that's 25 grand. You know, and you can keep going from there. If it's a server down for a hardware failure or a disaster, if you have a loss of site, you can see how expensive this gets very, very quickly. And that's just your billable rate. That's not only accounting for how much you're paying those individuals to sit there and not do anything. So when we talk about, you know, an expensive sonic wall, or if we talk about a possible, you know, expensive backup, maybe like, you know, Datto or some of those more expensive ones that are going to get you up and running very, very quickly, this is the justification for stuff like that. Because in the event that you might have some downtime, these are the possible scenarios that you might go through. So how do you protect yourself? And this is where we're going to bring Justin in here. Justin, you know, Reinmuth, we found him from Techrug. In fact, Sandra found him for Techrug. Sandra, why don't you talk about how we came in to meet Justin?
Actually, it was Eric who met Justin, so I'm not 100% sure. But I think Eric met him at a conference that we attended, and Justin did some work for us. He actually wrote our insurance policy for us, so that's how we met Justin.
And he's the co-founder and CEO of Techrug. They do insurance for technology professionals, but they also do them for individual clients. So if anybody has any questions or concerns or anything at all, Justin's a very, very nice guy, very easy to speak with, and he's very knowledgeable about this subject. So I would hope that you guys, you know, if you want to reach out to him directly and ask him any questions that you might have. Justin, are you still with us?
Yes, I'll be paying Kevin and Sandra for those nice words after the webinar.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So Justin, why don't you take it away? I know we have a bunch of questions for you that we're going to start off with, and I think that you know, I just wanted to get into some of the things that you know, basically this is such a fantastic subject, and I can't wait to get into it. But you know, and I do have your slides here. But for number one, you know, what types of things that should our clients know if they're in the market or looking at getting cyber insurance? What are the first types of questions that you might come up with, and so that they're prepared at least for the first interview?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, first, why does a company need, or every organization needs, cyber insurance? I mean, to me, it's like having workers' comp. You got to have it anymore, because any company that handles, maintains, or process what we call personally identifiable information, which could be driver's license numbers, it could be social security numbers, dates of birth. There's 47 states that have privacy laws on the book that define what they call personally identifiable information, or it could be protected health information. If you're offering health insurance to your employees, you've got account numbers, you've got medical record numbers, you've got insurance beneficiary numbers. So that stuff has to be protected by the laws on the books, right? And a lot of times when we're talking with, you know, doctors' offices or lawyers or accounting firms, architects and engineers, they say, well, we outsource all of our IT, so, you know, our IT provider's on the hook. Well, you know what? If you read the Net Diligence cyber claim study that comes out every year, right, about 45% of the claims that get turned in are things that, you know, we hear about in the news, hacks, malware, viruses, things like that. But each organization has a 55% chance of turning in their own claim, right? In other words, the IT company is not responsible for a staff mistake on the architect's end. The IT company is not responsible for a lost or stolen laptop at Starbucks. by that accounting office. 22% of the claims that get turned in are staff mistakes and rogue employees. I mean, how many employees wake up, they didn't get the best night's sleep, or maybe they had a beer or too many the night before, right? And there's a staff mistake and they accidentally, expose this personally identifiable protected health information. Each and every client that handles and maintains this personally identifiable information, protected health information, has to have a cyber liability policy in place to protect themselves against client lawsuits or even a class action lawsuit that might be brought on behalf of an attorney. So, a cyber liability policy is a cheap way to protect yourself. Now, typically, when you were saying, what do they have to go through? Each organization, when they're applying for coverage, will have to go through some sort of questionnaire, right? So, it's important that they've got firewall, that they've got antivirus, that they've got certain practices and procedures in place in order to qualify for a cyber liability policy. And I would say, honestly, Kevin, most people that are probably a managed service client of yours, they're probably going to qualify to get a quote.
Great.
Good to know.
That's a good point. And those that aren't managed, if we're not managing your workstations or your servers, that makes a very good case for you to get on the managed services platform, because, in those cases, if you're not managed, you're kind of just out there doing your own thing. We're not keeping up to date with those patches. We're not keeping up to date with those security flaws. And, so if you go to apply for something like this, you'll definitely either, you'll be denied right out, or they could deny it later on the back end when they find out that you're not being patched properly.
So the next, Kevin, you and I were talking earlier, but one of the questions that we get asked the most is, and I guess it's maybe more of an impression, is that our clients all think that cyber liability policies are created equal, and they're not, right? So if you're going to shop price on certain things, auto insurance, workers' comp, I mean, those, it doesn't matter whether you have a 3-year-old Honda, whether you're with State Farm, Allstate, or Nationwide. If you total that car, they're all going to give you the value of the 3-year-old Honda, right? Same with workers' comp. I mean, it doesn't matter what carrier you're with. If you've got an employee that throws out their back or gets carpal tunnel, they're going to pay the workers' comp or the hospital bills, right? But when it comes to cyber insurance, this is kind of an unregulated product, right? So different carriers will offer what we call different insuring agreements, right? And even within those insuring agreements, different carriers will have institute certain exclusions where other carriers might not. So I just wanted to point out, if you are going to buy a cyber liability policy, what are some important things to look for? So if you actually want to go back one slide, the first one that I'm going to bring up, Kevin, is what we call computer network security, right? So more and more people are accessing their information by home computers, by tablets and devices that a IT company may or may not be protecting, right? So if you're not protecting that device or that home computer, and you're not keeping up with the version updates, right? Or even if some people operate computers anymore without antivirus or a firewall. So the computer network security is in place to prevent the unauthorized access into that computer system. So that's one of the things that you want to make sure you've got for your home devices, your tablets, your your phones, things like that. Now, when you're looking at computer network security, go to the next one. There's some common exclusions that carriers will put in there, and I'm going to bring up an example in the next slide. But this is what I mean by they're not all created equal, right? So if you look at the slide here, Carrier A basically is saying, hey, if you don't keep up with the latest updates and patches, and Norton goes from 1.1 to 1.2, and you don't go to 1.2 the next day, and you get a claim, we're not going to pay that claim because you told us on the application that you would keep up with the latest updates. Now, anyone, and you can probably comment on this, Kevin, is anyone, when a new patch comes out, most IT professionals or most people that are in charge of protecting these devices, they might wait a day, they might wait a week, because they're whitelisting to make sure that that the patch goes okay, that there aren't any bugs in there. So there's some time before that patch is installed. Carrier B, right, they don't have that same exclusion. They say, hey, instead of the next version, you have to update the software product within a reasonable period of time. So again, if you're going to have to pick your poison, are you going to want to live with the next version restriction, or are you going to want to live with as soon as reasonably possible? I think most IT companies, and you can feel free to comment, Kevin, will tell you that, hey, we might need a week before we install that patch or that update.
Absolutely. I mean, there's many times where, Microsoft themselves, they'll issue something on Patch Tuesday, and then by Wednesday or Thursday, they've pulled that patch back because, they've heard from certain individuals or large companies and clients that they've installed this patch and it's broken something else. So even our own patch policy for our managed services will wait at least a week to push out, these types of things to make sure that, anything that's been pushed out is definitely something that's going to stay there. So, that goes for Microsoft, that goes for Trend, that goes for Sonic Walls. We're definitely going to wait, and even Autodesk, products, we even wait to push out the latest and greatest versions, after a certain amount of time, hopefully even when the service pack comes out, to know that these bugs have been addressed and it's not going to break more than it fixes. So that's definitely more of a reason to go with Carrier B's exclusion, doing it for a reasonable period of time.
You want to go to the next slide? This is going to illustrate my example here, right? If you guys were to hop on your computers right now and type in healthcare IT news Cottage Health, right, you'll see where the carrier wrote a cyber policy for Cottage Health. And Cottage Health on the application said that they would perform due diligence on third parties and audit these vendors to make sure that their security practices and procedures were adequate. And they also said that, again, they would keep up with these these patches on a daily basis, and once the next one is released, that they would update. Well, I mean, imagine, right, Kevin, a lot of people work with Microsoft or Apple or Google. Can you imagine showing up to their doorstep and trying to audit them one time a year? I mean, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So I could make a case that the carrier that provided Cottage Health with this cyber policy would never, ever, ever pay a claim because of these, the exclusion that they put on there and what they ask on the application. So you just got to be, very careful when you're looking, for this standalone cyber policy, that you're dealing with somebody that does this each and every day so they can point out these little idiosyncrasies.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it's very, very important to have us, review the policies and procedures for that insurance policy to make sure that we can actually meet and meet those requirements.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you guys would be an integral part in your clients, obtaining this cyber insurance, because there are going to be questions that they ask that will be network security related that, your expertise is going to have to come in and make them available.
Mm-hmm. Social engineering.
Yep, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, electronic media liability. This is another one, and believe it or not, I mean, we've seen a spike in these type of claims because more and more of your business owners' policies, what we call BOPs, business owners' policies, they have coverage for what they call personal and advertising injury, and, they'd offer them for small firms for like $500. It also protects your business assets, your general liability. Well, when they wrote these policies, right, they didn't imagine that, Twitter, Facebook, these social networking sites would be as big as they are today. So there's been a huge uptick in libel, slander, defamation claims, right? So what you're finding is now these business insurance policies are excluding and carving back coverage, and they're punting that exposure over to the cyber liability carrier. So, with libel, slander, and defamation, it's kind of a slippery slope. It's kind of like, maybe a sexual harassment claim where if somebody says, wow, you look really good in your suit today, is that a compliment or is that harassment, right? So libel and slander, defamation can work the same way. If you say something and you think it might be harmless, if a competitor takes that as, hey, you're trying to defame me or defame a certain industry or something like that, then they'll come at you. And if that's done, via these social networking sites, your business insurance carrier is a lot of times going to kick that over to the cyber liability carrier. And if you don't have cyber liability, then, you're going to be defending this lawsuit, which, whether it's right or wrong, I remind my clients that, lawsuits aren't always about negligence, they're about the allegations of negligence. So you can spend $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 getting yourself out of something you shouldn't have been in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is true.
The next slide is what a lot of people think when they take out a cyber liability policy, is privacy liability. You're in charge of protecting, once you get that social security number, once you get that driver's license number, you're in charge of protecting that information. So if there's theft, if there's loss, if there's unauthorized disclosure of your client's information, or it could be employees' social security numbers or health records like we talked about on the earlier slide, right? That's all of a sudden going to trip a bunch of dominoes, right? Because the next thing that you got to do is now, once that information has been compromised, you're going to have to notify people, right? So, I pulled this statistic from the Net Diligence 2015 Cyber Liability and Data Breach Insurance Claims Report, where they said, the cost per record was about $107 per record. So imagine if you have to notify 1,000 people, right? I mean, I don't know if my math's best, but you get about a $100,000 claim. Most organizations can't sustain that type of loss, right? So, making sure that once the information is compromised, you got to have the notification cost to take that next step, and you don't want the policy to just send it to privacy liability. You want to make sure that you've got money in there to notify people and provide credit monitoring for up to a year.
Right, and we do have a number of individuals. You said about the credit card monitoring and all of that. We do have a number of individuals who do run credit cards, and they need that type of oversight. So they'll definitely push back the claim. If they happen to lose a laptop or something like that with that information on that.
Yeah, and I've talked to people that say, heck, they don't even need any more between, universities getting hacked in, or like you said, Yahoo or whatever. They don't even need to buy third-party credit monitoring service, because once a year they're getting stuff in the mail that a vendor's been hacked, and they're getting free credit monitoring anyway. So, it's something that, by law you've got to follow the practice, or the rules on the books, or the laws on the books, I should say. And so notification's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Let's see.
The next slide, and I don't know, if many people, if you want to go, there we go. If many people remember the BP oil spill, I just bring it up because it was, at the time it was a horrible disaster, right? But us here in Ohio, and I don't know if maybe people generally around the U.S. got bombarded with BP commercial where they were encouraging you to come down to the Gulf Coast to spend your money, right? Because they don't want to pay lost wages for the fishermen, right? But they were also doing some nice fluffy PR type moves to keep a good name for BP. Well, the same happens for an individual that gets hacked into. I mean, imagine if a competitor of yours gets wind because you make the newspaper, you make the local news, or if you're on the HIPAA wall of shame. I think it's over 500 records you go on the HIPAA wall of shame, and it's public information. But you better believe that all your competitors are going to use that against you, right? And I think they said, $1 of bad PR, one nugget of PR, you need $10 to make up in good PR. So you're going to have to hire and work with a PR firm to get your good name back. And if you're talking about these large, conglomerates like a Yahoo or like Target, right? I mean, they've got the money to sustain it, because it's going to be more of a marathon than it is a sprint. But for these smaller companies, right? If you look at Target stock price, even after they had their their little breach, their stock price went down 50% because people didn't feel comfortable giving their credit cards right away to Target, right? So if your customers don't feel like their information is adequately protected, and they might look for another dentist, they might look for another lawyer, right? And for you to lose half of your book of business, that could put the company in serious jeopardy. So you got to make sure that you've got that public relations crisis management funds. The next bullet point I wanted to point out was regulatory defense. A lot of our customers have to comply with HIPAA, or they have to comply with PCI, or Sarbanes-Oxley, or GLB. There's some sort of regulatory body that they have to comply with. So if, as a result of that breach, the regulatory body comes knocking on your door, and they either want to do an investigation, or they want to assess some sort of fine or penalty, not all of these cyber policies have regulatory defense and penalties. So you got to make sure, if you fall under HIPAA, if you fall under PCI, that you've got that regulatory defense and penalties coverage.
And we do have a number of people that are on the PCI compliance list. I know those come in as tickets every once in a while, so we have got to make sure that they're up to date with all kinds of new policies and procedures that are out there. So that definitely goes right up their alley.
It does.
Yeah, and the next slide here, these are going to be more of first-party coverages. So when I mean first-party, I mean the individual law firm, the individual accountant. I mean, going back to your example of lost wages, right? I mean, imagine if you suffer a hack, right? And then that data, as a result of the hack, is either corrupted or your systems are shut down. I mean, everybody, that we insure anymore, they rely so heavily on their IT and their computer systems to do their business each and every day. So if that data is corrupted, you need some money to have that data reproduced and reduplicated, right? What happens if you go down? I mean, most people carry a business insurance policy that has business interruption coverage for a fire or a tornado, right? Where they'll get 12 months of income if that happens to them. But what happens if they get a hack and their business is shut down for a month? I mean, you just did earlier on the slide what the cost is at $80 per hour, right? So you want to make sure that you've got some sort of business interruption. I mean, you carry it for fire and windstorms, right? You need to make sure that you're carrying it for these cyber threats.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one that I wanted to point out was cyber extortion. This is kind of the next big thing. And again, we get a ton of calls about, you were alluding to it earlier, but the crypto virus, right? So, where these bad guys are essentially taking the data, their military grade encryption, and the only way to get it is to buy the key from them to release that data, right? So this is like kidnap and ransom type money, right? Where you need to have a bucket in there, to pay to get that data back. And some people ask us, well, why would the carrier do that? Well, the carrier would much rather pay a $10,000 ransom than if you're going to be shut down for a month and you're doing, I don't know, even pick $5,000 a day, right? I mean, all of a sudden now they're on a $150,000 claim. So which is cheaper? Pay $10,000, get the data back, or pay $150,000 in lost income for the month. So you got to make sure that you got the cyber extortion, because kind of back to your earlier slide, it's not if, it's when you're going to get hit with that crypto virus.
Definitely. Now, are there times when let's say a breach does happen? Are there things that you then follow up later on to make sure that they've gotten in once, and you've paid out a claim, but then you want to make sure that certain things are then put in place? Are there certain questions you ask or certain requirements after the initial hack has been done that need to be put in place?
That's a great question. So a lot of times when you're going through the renewal process, that question will be asked, like, what did you learn? What steps did you take to prevent this same instance from happening again? So that's usually addressed during the renewal process.
Okay. So would the rate at that point go up if the client was breached?
That's a good question too. It really depends on the carrier as a whole. I mean, we've seen people that have had rather large claims where their premium barely goes up, and we've seen people that have had, not so large claims where maybe that carrier didn't have a good year and the premium does go up. I think that, a lot of times people don't understand, Sandra, is these policies don't have to be as expensive as you think. I mean, I was just working on, I think it was a $500,000 or $1 million, somewhere in that range, accounting firm where they picked up cyber liability for $1,000 a year, right? So you're looking at, what is it, $80 a month? They don't have to be that expensive,
Right.
So, for a relatively small amount of money, you can pick up $1 million worth of coverage. And, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I was reading an article that was put out by the insurance industry that was saying that in the next 10 years, what the property and casualty insurance carriers have paid out for losses due to fires and wind, they're going to pay out the next 10 years. So in a third of the time, they're going to pay out the same money for cyber liability claims. So, all of our information's, out there. It's in the cloud. It's on the net, right? So for a company that handles and maintains and processes this sensitive information, not to have a cyber liability, in my opinion, is just not a very good idea to operate your business.
Right. Now, we had a client that was quoted, I'm sorry, not quoted. They were told, they were an architect, and they were told that they needed $5 million of coverage. And this is not a small company, but not a huge company either. It just didn't sound right to me.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of coverage, but I remind my clients sometimes there's a cost of doing business, right, in order to comply. But you're seeing more and more of whether it's vendors or whether it's clients. So let's take an accounting firm that might deal with, a certain, a client that they provide services, right? Anymore, when they ask for certificates of insurance, they used to want to make sure that you had general liability and you had professional liability. But now we're seeing cyber liability, be a requirement. So, a lot of times organizations, even if they don't want to take out a cyber liability policy, they're being pushed to take it out because a third party is making them take out in order to do business with them.
Got it.
Do you or some other, individuals that do the insurance, do they require any kind of like penetration testing before they issue a liability or issue the policy itself?
Kevin, that's a great question, because I think a lot of times right now, I think that will change in 3 and 4 years from now. So the answer is no right now. But I think, again, going back when we were talking a little bit earlier about the next 10 years, the insurance industry paying out as much as they did in the last 30 years, I think that it is going to be, I don't want to say harder to qualify, right, but you're going to have to take extra steps in order to qualify for a cyber liability policy. Right now, it's just, a quick application. They ask some network security questions. They ask how many records you might have access to. They ask revenue information. But I think, when these claims, they continue to come in, I think that there'll be extra steps in order to qualify for these cyber liability policies. But today, that doesn't exist.
Interesting.
And I just wanted you to reiterate again that, claims can get denied as well if you're not up on your software updates and you don't have a firewall in place, and you said that you did. I think it's important that our clients realize that too.
Well, I think that's why they got that's why they got organizations such as yourself, right? They probably don't want to deal with that stuff, so they're going to outsource it to you, right? And they're going to outsource that liability and that exposure to you, so that they're not responsible for keeping up with that, because they've got to run their accounting firm, or they've got to run their architectural firm, or their legal law practice. So that's what we're finding, is that a lot of our standalone cyber clients are outsourcing their IT to a parallel edge for, on a managed service type basis, so that they can get rid of that headache.
Right. Okay.
And I think this last slide, I just wanted to point out, because one of the common questions we get is cyber liability and cyber crime the same thing? And it's not, right? So I don't know if anyone on this call has had any sort of these phishing emails, right? But Kevin, if you want to flip it to the next slide here, cyber liability is there if the sensitive data that we talked about earlier is compromised somehow. Cyber crime is if you lose money, right? So the two things that, and more cyber liability carriers are now offering a cyber crime option onto the cyber liability policy, so you can purchase it one of two ways. You can buy a standalone cyber crime, or you can add it to your cyber liability policy depending on the carrier. But the two things that you want to pay attention to are funds transfer fraud. I was talking to a claims adjuster at one of these companies that was telling me now they ran into a situation where an employee of a firm opened up a bogus link, and the link had a computer program that went through and basically pulled a bunch of banking, routing, account information, and it authorized funds transfer out of their bank account, right? So if you check with your bank and ask them, hey, would we be compensated if that happened to us, there's regulations on the book, or laws on the book, called the Electronic Funds Transfer Act Regulation E, which basically says that a personal customer of a bank and a commercial customer of a bank, they don't get treated the same. So the response that you're going to get from the bank is, the only two that I've ever heard is, we've got enough practices and procedures in place to make sure that doesn't happen, which is no, or the answer is no, you need a crime policy, right? So you want to make sure that you've got protection against funds transfer fraud. The other one that you want to get is the cyber deception. So we've had multiple instances. I'll bring up two. One was down in Tampa, Florida, where I believe it was like a motion picture type company, but they had received an email that looked like it was from a vendor, and I think one of the digits was off on the email account, and so instead of Google being spelled G-O-O-G, it was like G-O-G or something like that. But basically, the vendor said, hey, we need you to pay these 5 invoices, right? And so they ended up sending a total of $300,000 through 5 transfers, gone. No way to get it back. We had another law firm in Arizona where it looked like one of the partners had sent something to the office administrator to pay this bill, and so again, it wasn't. I mean, it was a lot, $50,000. It wasn't $300,000, but she did it, and again, his name was misspelled by 1 digit, and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. So cyber deception is a big thing, and that's something that they got to pay attention to, because again, crime and liability are 2 different things. So make sure when you're looking for the cyber liability policy that if that carrier offers an option for cyber crime, that you're picking up that endorsement, because it's not that expensive.
Right.
And
We actually had a client this happened to as well, the cyber deception. Luckily, it was caught, but I mean, I could see how easily somebody can fall for an email like that. So it's scary. This is all very scary stuff.
Yeah, and I know, listen, everyone's doing their best to protect it, but a lot of times, they're the criminals, so to speak, or they're getting more and more sophisticated, more and more tricky, right? So sometimes they're getting through and getting around things, and as much as if you're going to look at the risk management pie, having good firewall, having good backup, having good network security is important, but so is having a cyber liability policy and having a disaster recovery plan. So the risk management pie is much broader than just an insurance policy or just having firewall. You got to make sure that you got a comprehensive outlook when you're talking about cyber liability.
Right.
Fantastic. Are there any? I haven't been looking at the chat. Does anybody have any questions out there for Justin? I want to make sure to address
there was
anything out
another
there.
question for Justin. Just find it here. What if an attack happens? If security is breached at a client, is there certain information that you're going to ask of a client?
For us.
For instance, if a client decides to try to clean up the virus themselves, sometimes there's information that we can't get anymore, as in how did the virus get in? Was it an email? Was it a hack into the server? Are there certain things that these clients need to pay attention to and we should be paying attention to when there is a security breach?
Or even getting law enforcement involved too.
Right. So if the first step, right, is if you suspect something like that happens, you want to call, the insurance agent, or, sometimes on these policies there's a link for a claims email or a claims number, but you want to notify them of an instance ASAP. Now, these carriers, they have forensic experts that they've basically as vendors that they've teamed up with, right? So a lot of times, once you get the insurance company involved, we call it forensics, but they'll investigate, how this breach occurred, why it occurred, how they got through, right? So that's one part of the cyber policy is that forensics where, they're going to take over and determine, how they got through and how this incident happened.
Right. So I think it's important also that before you call the insurance company, call us so that we can make sure we gather all the information that's going to be needed for this forensics interview, which I've done a few after the fact. So I just wanted to bring that up. Call us, then call the insurance company.
Yeah, and do you then direct people to call or contact law enforcement at that point? The FBI or local police at that point? Because we've had sometimes where we've been directed to do that or told to do that, and other times it doesn't really pan out. So
we had a client recently that actually they called the FBI and they were told, yeah, we're not really interested or covering that anymore. Rebecca is on the call. Rebecca, if you want to talk about that, raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, right, once it gets turned over to the insurance carrier, they're going to get, a claims adjuster involved, depending on, how big the breach is. They might get a law firm or the legal team involved. So a lot of the communication and the next step is going to come directly from the carrier.
Okay.
Okay, I have Rebecca unmuted. Rebecca, do you want to talk about what happened to you?
Sure. We actually were directed to a website. The FBI had a website that we took and filed the information through for our claim, and they said that they would contact us, and we never heard anything back from them. So we did it several times, thinking, oh, maybe it didn't go through. But they said that they would get in contact with us, and really never heard anything more from them. And at one point, they said that I think it was due to the time frame that it would be expected to be a very long time frame. Like number of months before we would hear anything from them. So, I mean, that was last year, I believe. So, and we hadn't heard anything yet. So,
okay.
And
no, go ahead, Rebecca. I'm sorry.
And we went through, we went through our insurance, we went through our claims, and they were able to provide us a little bit of money, but a lot of times you have to make sure, especially we're in the architectural field, that we record our time cards and things, that you have to have specific instruction to your employees regarding how they should input their time to show that it was recordable time, because they were actually taking and re-entering information that they had previously entered in that case. So that's something that's really specific, but it was something that we had to kind of learn when going through the process.
Right. Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for your comments.
That's an interesting question, Justin. I mean, with architects, they have to, define their time and their timesheets as to how long they're being down. Do they then have to, issue that to the insurance company and show a report documenting that downtime for their employees?
Yeah, I mean, usually when these, business interruption, if it's due to a hack, again, they'll ask for that information, and then they might ask for, a couple years of financials, right, to make sure that they can come up with an accurate number and say, hey, in October of 2014, 15, and 16, you did this amount of revenue, you were down for October of 17, and it looks like during the year you were up 10%, so we're going to give you 10% more than it was in October of 2016. So there's a whole process that, that you go through. But, the clients want to make sure that they're compensated, and I don't blame them.
Great.
Right. I think what's also interesting, what Rebecca said, is that the FBI used to respond fairly quickly when something like this happened a few years ago, but it seems like they're not as interested anymore. I'm just making an observation here, but that's
the one, Sandra, the one that we've seen that's kind of stepped it up, and I don't know if you have any healthcare clients, but HIPAA is the one that we've seen. Yeah. We've seen, years and years ago, they kind of, I don't know if it was scare tactics, right? But there was no substance, or, they weren't sticking their teeth. But now all of a sudden we're seeing, fines and penalties for not complying there. And so that's, I would say one area or one industry, HIPAA, that has kind of gained some momentum over the last year or so.
Okay.
Hey, Justin, there's a good question that just popped up, and it has to do with almost like cloud, security. So, two different, I guess, areas that, if you could touch on. Number one, let's say your entire server is now in the cloud, and that gets breached, so that's kind of one instance of how you would handle something like a cloud data. And or let's say, for instance, one of the clients uses InFocus, so all their accounting, or QuickBooks in the cloud. So now it's your data, but it's being handled by a third party in their systems. So in those two instances, how liable are you for that data? Does that then fall to their companies who houses the cloud server, who houses QuickBooks in the cloud, and how is that handled?
Right. I mean, that's a good question. So first of all, I'd point what the contracts say, right? So a lot of the times these cloud vendors, when we looked at contracts, they limit their liability. So they might limit it to 2 months worth of fees, right? So if you're paying $20,000 a month with them, they're only going to pay $40,000, right? So to have a cyber liability policy, you want to make sure that it extends to these cloud providers, right, when they have your data, because if the gap is between the $40,000 they're going to give you, and you've got notification costs of $100,000, who's going to make up that $60,000? Right? So that cyber liability policy, you want to make sure that you have coverage for data that is handled and maintained and by a third-party cloud provider. So I would say that, A, you need a cyber liability, or A, you need to check the contract and see what it says, right? How are they limiting their liability? Because most of these cloud providers are limiting their liability with you. But the second thing is that's why you even need that cyber liability policy, or it makes it more important, is that that's beyond your control. And if there is a breach because of that, and Kevin, there's actually a, I don't want to say, but there was a company that you would be familiar with, that we got a bunch of emails because they did have a potential, they had somebody had left like a test password on something, and they had a breach, and then all of a sudden we got an email from like 15 IT providers that they had forwarded the email from this certain vendor to us saying, hey, listen, so that was an example where, their E&O policy was covering the gap based on, the mishandling of that information by a vendor.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It looks like that question was from Rosemary. It looks like Rosemary has another question. Let's see. Oh, so this is probably more for me than you, Justin. So I apologize if if I digress for a second. But she asked if a victim of ransomware could back up our data on an external hard drive or a cloud. Is there a way to get the data back up? So this is going to go back to basically your downtime and what your expectation is. And I touched on this during our backup presentation webinar, what was that, 3 or 4 webinars ago. So, you have to understand what's your expectation of downtime and how quickly is your expectation to be back up after that downtime. So, if for instance your expectation is to, you're hacked or something happens to your server, your expectation is I need to be back up within the hour, then your backup needs to meet that expectation. And you also have to understand that the money that's going to have to justify that is definitely going to raise, because in order to get this really nice backup that you want to be back up within the hour, it's definitely going to cost a little bit more than a backup, let's say, where it's a basic file level backup and it's okay if I'm down 3 days and waiting for this backup to come off site. Then that price is going to go down because your expectation goes down. So there has to be that balancing act, and we have tested and tried many different backup providers that are out there, and we have an understanding of, meeting those expectations and can marry you to the backup policy that you want, and even continue to help you as you move through. Maybe your data goes up and maybe this gets too expensive, or maybe the demands go up and you need to be up and ready within a shorter amount of time. So that is always going to be a balancing act as we move forward, which is why I put that slide up about the amount of downtime and how quickly those funds get really out of sorts. So we can definitely talk about that on the side and figure out what's the best backup policy for you. But that's definitely a good question, and to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to come up with a scheduled task for us to make sure that we're testing that backup. Just having a backup and saying you have a backup is one thing. You can get a report every day saying everything is glorious, but then you go and try to get something from that backup and, oh, there happened to be an error on the external hard drive that wasn't noticeable and didn't come up during a report. Well, the time you want to find that out is not when you're down. The time you want to find that out is during a fire drill, or during, in a cyber fire drill, if you will, or, during these test restore times. So you definitely want to get us involved in doing these test restores on a regular basis, and making sure that, we're doing our due diligence to make sure that, what we say is happening with the backup is actually what's on pen to paper. So let's see, there's another question here. An associate has received an email from a person claiming to be our CEO. So this goes to what Justin was saying. In the past, an associate received an email from a person claiming to be our CEO, asking to wire money to an account. The email was incorrect, and also the name. I sent the information to our outsourced IT company at the time. I've not heard anything back from them. Should I contact the authorities if this happens again? Justin?
I don't necessarily know. I get with the IT provider and find out why the email keeps coming through, right? I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of spam.
Yeah, I would suggest you either if you have a spam filter, maybe upgrade to a better spam filter. We have a very good one that we've been recommending, so call me. If you don't have a spam filter in place, get a spam filter in place. The spam filter will block these emails from coming in.
Yeah, because the email itself, it's not doing any harm. I mean, it's not collecting any data, anything like that. It's just trying to get you, to pay some amount of money, right? So, there's probably no reason to call authorities. I would just talk to your IT provider and find out why these emails keep on getting through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and why aren't we your outsourced IT provider?
Let's talk about that. Steve had a question about is cyber insurance necessary because these situations are not covered by general business liability insurance. Justin,
Correct.
you want to take that one?
Yeah,
Right.
so, I mean, more and more carriers are putting in a tiny amount of coverage. So, I mean, again, depending on the size of the firm, right? I mean, I don't know, they might give you $25,000, right? So, that's going to be a judgment call based on, again, using the slides that we showed you, the notification costs and stuff like that. But, you might have some coverage. Usually we see it for interruption of computer operations, kind of that, if you get denial of service, something like that. So, they'll give you like maybe $25,000 for lost income. But the ones that I've seen don't get into, regulatory fines and penalties. They don't get into the breach notification. They don't obviously get into the cyber crime. So you might have a tiny bit of coverage on the GL, but if you're in a tightly regulated industry, I don't know, retail, financial, healthcare, you're definitely not going to want to rely on that general liability policy. But I would contact your agent and ask them if there is coverage.
Okay. I'm just reading. It looks like a follow-up. It looks like that person from before did have a spam filter, and it hasn't happened for quite some time now. Okay, well, that's a good answer. That's a good answer.
That's good.
So just wrapping things up, basically the bottom line, we just need to get serious about, protecting your company against cybercrime, and if, that looks like it needs to be multiple ways now, not only, getting us involved, but also, making sure that you're covered just in case something does happen through some type of an insurance policy. So, definitely do that. So the first step, basically getting us involved, what we would do is come in and do a threat assessment. It involves, educating employees, looking at the different applications that you might have protecting you, whether it's your firewall, whether it's antivirus, whether it's all the different things that keep the bad guys out and the good guys safe. Once we do that threat assessment, we basically come up with an action plan to discover exactly what we need to do to get you coverage that you actually need. And then thirdly, the ongoing maintenance. This is what I alluded to about your backups. Just saying that you have something in place, whether that's a Sonic Wall, whether that's Trend Micro, whether it's this, that, and the other thing, there's updates, there's firmware updates, there's different planning steps that we need to go through. So if we're not there on a regular basis, we should really do stuff like that on a regular basis and talk to us about that. One of the different things that we're putting into place for one of the things we're putting in place for our clients that we have, that they're managed, so we're maybe managing their server, but we're not there on a regular basis, or even our non-managed clients, we do something called the Tech Up. So it's basically on the iteration of basically along the same lines of, you go every 6 months to your dentist. They're looking for cavities, they're looking for this, that, and the other thing, and you could be brushing your teeth every day, you'd be flossing in between your teeth, but all of a sudden you got a hole in a gaping hole in a molar somewhere, and you didn't think it was there, it didn't hurt, it didn't do anything like that, it's not infected, but the dentist did find it. And the only way they would have found that is by doing that 6-month checkup. So doing that same thing with us, doing a 6-month Tech Up, by having us come out, if we're not there on a regular basis, have us come out every 6 months and look for those cavities. Look for, hey, this Sonic Wall, they came out with a firmware update that's going to patch a couple of things. Trend Micro needs an update. There could be patches that aren't being posted to a workstation. All these little things add up, and all of a sudden you have a cavity that could have been filled within that 6-month period. So, if I don't call you, definitely call me to get you on this plan. Call me to get us on this plan of a 6-month Tech Up, because it's definitely something you should be doing proactively. So if I don't get to you, definitely reach out to me and we'll get you on that 6-month Tech Up plan, because I'd love to come out and see you, love to chit chat and catch up, but definitely want to come out and catch you up on all the different things that are out there. So that's definitely that ongoing maintenance. With regard to your backup, definitely got to backup, but like as I said before, not only backup, you want to make sure it's restorable. So if we're not there on a regular basis, again, with that Tech Up plan, we can definitely make sure that those backups are at least test restored. And even review your backup to see if what you have is maybe not as adequate to meet those expectations. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. I definitely want to thank Justin. I really appreciate you giving us your time today, and hopefully some people, if they have any extra questions or concerns, can reach out to you. Justin, do you have any last-minute suggestions or anything last-minute you want to say?
No, it was great. I appreciate you guys inviting me to hop on the call, and I thought it was hopefully for the participants, it was an informative webinar. So thanks again, and I would just really appreciate everyone joining the call this afternoon.
And I
Yeah,
appreciate
Kevin, maybe if you can put Jonathan's information back up there if
Definitely.
anyone wants to reach out to Jonathan with questions.
Definitely, I'll put that up as our last slide. And what I was going to say is, since this topic was so enlightening, I'm sure there was some people that couldn't make it today, or as you said, there's probably changes as we go forward with all the different things that are out there. So I'd love to see if we could have Justin back, maybe on a regular basis, to discuss this a little bit further, if you wouldn't mind, Justin.
Sure. Absolutely.
Great. So we have our webinars on our YouTube channel. You just have to go to http://tinyurl.com/parallel-edge-webinars. Next month, we're going to be talking about why we need firewall routers. It's one of those mythical devices that kind of is out there. It's an expensive device, but why is it so expensive? What exactly does it do? Sandra, you had said earlier, and I thought it was a great idea. Go ahead. You were talking about your house.
Oh, no, not having a firewall is like having a front door in your house, but not having a lock on that front door. That firewall is that lock for your front door.
That's definitely a great visual for that one. Stay tuned on our newsletter and our websites and our email blasts. We're going to be talking about different things that are going out there. The newsletter is a fantastic opportunity to catch up on all things tech. And like Sandra said, I just put Justin's information back up there. If you want to quick jot that down in case you have any questions directly for him, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer.
And if you want to do a conference call with myself and Justin, you can reach out to me and I can get that set up as well.
Definitely. Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.